The U.S. government gave millions of dollars to telecom companies to build and deploy fiber optic high-speed internet cables around the country. They sure did, and the telecom companies did it. They built the fiber optic cables, they put them in the ground and deployed it fully, and then they never used any of it.
Okay, so this TikTok is a perfect example of why the free market will never solve any real problem.
Telecom companies didn't have any incentive to use the new infrastructure because they couldn't charge extra for it. All that shit was hooked up and working and completely unused until a certain crafty engineer at a certain company had the bright idea of picking it up. Who could it be? Oh, I know, it was Netflix. No, it wasn't Netflix. Well, who was it? Riot Games, the operators of League of Legends. No way. Yup, Riot Games had a ping problem, and so they bought up all this unused fiber optic infrastructure all around the country to route their League of Legends packets through. That is an absolutely true story, and it is hilarious.
So this TikTok by A Whole Coin points out the most ridiculous fact about our internet infrastructure, which is that a lot of it was built and was never used until an online gaming platform came on to take a huge amount of control over a huge amount of fiber optic cables that had not been used. But this speaks to something bigger than just internet infrastructure, because this type of thing happens with infrastructure across the board, and it is exactly why reformist policies to try to tweak the market in such a way that maybe the capitalists will do the right thing never actually work. Fundamentally, market incentives and market-based solutions to various problems in society are bound to fail, because instead of the government having control over an institution or over some specific infrastructure and just hiring the people necessary to maintain it and build it, and then thus that infrastructure being under democratic control, which would allow for greater efficiency and, believe it or not, actually less paperwork. Instead of that, not only do you have this arcane bureaucratic system where private companies bid for contracts and grant money from the government, but you also get this problem of these private companies that have real material control over the infrastructure and want to use it for a profit. Because what these companies will end up doing is either not using infrastructure or not maintaining infrastructure in order to cut costs, all in an effort to make a profit for themselves as opposed to for the public. And this is a big thing that actually has happened in California with their power grid, where their power grid had a ton of failures and it was this huge problem. And the government of California gave the power grid company a ton of money to fix the power grid, which they did not do. And this happens across the country, where you'll have these private companies that manage this infrastructure. The government will give them money to do specific things. The company will then take that money in order to reduce their bottom line costs while increasing the profit margins for the shareholders, and fundamentally do either nothing or the bare minimum to address what the government told them to do in the first place. Because at the end of the day, if the private company is the one that's in control of the infrastructure, and the private company is the one that's in control over the management, development, and staffing of these projects, well, they will always seek to increase their profits no matter what. Their main goal is profits. It's not to meet the needs of the public. And so fundamentally, if you have some component of critical infrastructure, whether it be the internet, whether it be the postal service, whether it not be bridges, dams, power grids, the way that makes the most amount of sense is for it to be under the democratic control of the government, to make sure that everything is done by government employees and not private contractors. Because every layer of private contracting that you add, every layer of private company that you add, not only do you add a profit margin on top of that, but you also add multiple layers of bureaucracy on top of it. Both on the front end, when you're talking about bidding for government contracts or bidding for grant money from the government, as well as on the regulatory end, as it's happening, where you're going to have government inspectors and regulations that are looking at what the company's doing, and then within the company in order to do compliance checks and all of these various things. And then even more layers for every single private contractor that private company then subcontracts to in order to do the various things that they're doing. And so with all of that, it becomes ridiculous amounts of layers of bureaucracy, credentialization, inspections, you name it, when it really could just at the end of the day all be government employees. And that is actually why the United States and capitalist countries in general actually tend to have way, way, way more bureaucracy than any socialist country out there, which is just sort of a twist of irony, especially considering the way that right-wingers used to try and paint the USSR as some sort of like bureaucratic nightmare. But so fundamentally, this is why private companies will never solve these problems. And efforts from politicians under capitalism to use market reforms or different market incentives to build things like critical infrastructure is never really going to work. Because at the end of the day, if it's not profitable, it's not going to happen. And that is the very basis of capitalism. And you can't get over that hurdle without challenging capitalism directly.